In this module, we are going to introduce how to set up and calibrate the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker. If using the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker, there are a few setup steps that you should complete prior to setting up the subject with the Kinarm robot. The first of these is that you want to ensure that the subject does not have any eye makeup. This includes mascara or eyeliner. Any type of eye makeup can perhaps interfere with the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker. Once they've done that, you then want to put the target sticker on their head. Typically this is put on approximately midline. It can be above one of the eyes if you know the subject has a dominant eye and if that's the one you're going to be tracking. It should only be a couple centimeters above the eye. You do not want it too high up or it might get blocked by the virtual reality stand later, and you also don't want it too down close to the eye or it'll interfere with the way the gaze tracking camera operates. And the last thing you want to do is ensure that there is no hair in front of the target sticker. So for example, you can use clips, or if there's long enough hair, some sort of elastic to hold the hair back. This is important not only right now, but it has to last for the entire duration of the experiment. Once the subject has been set up in the robot and wheeled up to the virtual reality station, you want to ensure that their head tilt is appropriate for Kinarm gaze tracking. Subjects have a tendency, when you first wheel them up, to be looking straight ahead. And what you want to do is have them tilt their head down at an angle. As an operator, I can look at them both from the side profile to get a sense of whether their head is tilted appropriately, and I can also be watching them in the Kinarm gaze tracking screen as another way of checking this angle. To calibrate the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker, I first start on the Dexterit-E computer in Dexterit-E in the Calibration dialog, and I click on the Calibrate Kinarm Gaze-Tracker. I don't continue at this point. I first need to ensure that the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker is finding the subject's pupil and CR appropriately. I look over at the screen, and first I need to select one of the eyes to track. Typically, it doesn't matter which eye. Sometimes subjects have a dominant eye. If they know that, then you can use it. If not, then it doesn't really matter. Once you've selected an eye, what you're going to want to do is ask the subject to look at different targets on the screen, because right now they can see targets representing the extent of the Kinarm calibration region. So can I have you look at the top right target? So while she's doing that, I'm going to be looking at the CR and the pupil and ensuring that they're being found robustly. Typically, we start with the thresholds at a magnification of ×1. So that looks good. Go to the top left, please. Look down to the bottom right, and now the bottom left. And you can see with this subject, the bottom right was the one that had the most issues. So go back to the bottom right. And I'm just going to adjust the pupil threshold so you can see that if the threshold is adjusted down too low, the pupil doesn't get found. And if I conversely go too high, then eventually what will start to happen is it'll start to identify regions that are not part of the pupil as if they were the pupil. So this subject actually is going to use the more typical threshold multiplications of ×1. And again, if you do adjust those, you want to go back and recheck each of the top right, top left, and bottom right, bottom left. Once you're satisfied, go back to the main screen and we're going to click Continue. And what we need to do is instruct the subject to look at the targets one at a time, and I want you to look at the center of each target and don't look away until the next target appears. I then go back to this screen, the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker screen, and I'm going to be watching both for the messages up here in terms of whether it finds the pupil, corneal, reflection, and target. And I can also look down at the small image of what the gaze tracker sees for the pupil. Once the calibration is complete, I can go back over to this screen and see what the results are. In this particular example, it had a problem with 1, and so I can either accept, which I don't want to do here, or I can click the recalibrate button to try again. So we're going to try this again. So again, during this recalibration, as an operator, I'm watching the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker screen and making sure that everything looks good on the image of the eye, and that the warnings are okay. When the calibration is complete, I look back over at the Dexterit-E screen and I see that I've got a good calibration, so I can click the Accept button. Now I can then continue on with the rest of the either robot calibration or continue with the assessment if I've already calibrated the robot. Once you've started a task, you can see what the subject is doing by looking at the Dexterit-E screen. With the gaze tracker, you can see a little green hash mark that shows where they think the subject is looking. More importantly though, as an operator, I want to be looking at the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker screen and ensuring that the gaze tracker is continuing to successfully find the eye. I'm going to be looking for errors up in this region here, and I can also, as before with the calibration sequence, monitor and look at what the gaze tracker actually sees in terms of the subject's eye throughout the experiment. When attempting to calibrate subjects with the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker, it's important to realize that you may encounter some challenges with certain subjects. If you do encounter these situations, we recommend going to the Kinarm Lab Operator Guide for additional tips and tricks on setting up the subject and how you can work with the Kinarm Gaze-Tracker, changing the thresholds to adjust for the specific subject. It is important to also remember that there are subpopulations that simply will not calibrate. Upwards of maybe 10 or even 20% of your population you may just have challenges with and not get a good calibration.